Gamble's comments on location, catching up with a man that a lot of people are going to find very funny to believe that I actually got you on camera, Graeme Johanesen.
Yes, probably that's so, Paul. But we've got to make the most of it. There mightn't be many more chances.
Absolutely. I was pleasantly surprised when you said you would come on and have a little bit of a chat. Friday night at Bendigo is a big race meeting. It's crept up, I think, on a few people. There'd be a lot of people that wouldn't be actually aware of the meeting. And I was stoked when I saw the fast class trot for the night. It's called the True Roman Trot.
Yes, he still gets remembered, but possibly the new era of trotting people wouldn't even remember him now, but anyway, we can.
That's one of the reasons we're doing this, is because I think that's exactly what happens, that people do forget. I do a series called More Than a Horse, and generally I showcase the horses when they're alive and people are able to see them. But it's pretty fitting that this race is on, because it's a night where they remember both Graham Lang and Gavin Lang as well. And I know Gavin had a huge association and a huge part of Jake's life, True Roman's life.
Yeah, probably without Gavin, he would not have. Excuse me. He would not have been as good a horse as he was. He looked after, not only him, he looked after all horses, but he looked after him pretty special. And I remember I drove him one night in Adelaide. Gavin couldn't go or something, and he won, and I thought I was smart, but gee, give me a pay about how many times I hit him. He said, I haven't hit him that many times in the last 3 years. So.
He was a master at that. We say about the young people wouldn't know about True Roman. He was a unique horse, wasn't he? Because from afar, he just looked like this lovely racehorse. And when you were in the inner sanctum, I suppose is the right word to say, he was this lovely horse. But if you're on the periphery, he was just a little bit strange, wasn't he?
Yeah, very much so, Paul. You was never brave enough to drive him anyway. When you
I wasn't allowed to, and glad I wasn't.
Yeah, he had his little quirks, all right. But as a baby, he didn't have any of those. Like, as 2 and 3 year old, he never had any. But I think it was 4 or 5 when he first went to New Zealand, and he had a very rough trip back on the plane. And from that day on, his brains were never as good as they had been, because he was a beautiful horse when he was young. But I say to people now, he wasn't as good as he could have been because of his brains, the way you used to have to go about working him and things. But that's a bit hard to say when a horse wins 73 races, it's a bit hard to say, well, he wasn't as good as what he could have been. But he was a great horse, but yeah, I haven't got ulcers. I've had a few other things, but I haven't got ulcers, and he should have given me some.
As a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, how good a horse was he?
He was actually fairly good from the word go. When I first got him, Ronnie Pocock sent him out to me. He'd bought him at the Sydney sales, and he bought his mother at the same time. And he said to me, I can't get this mongrel to pace. I'll send him out. You know those Langs, you might be able to sell him for me. So anyway, he came out there and I worked him, and he was only a yearling, a late yearling. And a chap by the name of Tom Young was alive then, and I worked him one day, and Tommy loved trotters. And I said to him, is this good enough to win a 2-year-old race, Tom? He said, oh, you left it a bit late. I said, no, but he's only won. He said, what? He said, you go home and buy as big a share in him as you can. I said, well, we haven't got much money, so it'll be a pretty small share. Anyway, from there on, even as a baby, he could work with paces that was going all right and beat them. He was a pretty nice horse from a baby. He only had 4 starts as a 2-year-old and won 2. And I think we gave him 8 as a 3-year-old and won 5, because Gavin was always saying, you've got to look after this one, it could be special. Anyway, we sort of limited things and looked after him pretty good, and because even though he raced for a lot of times, I think he had about somewhere around 130 starts in his life, which might sound a lot to people, but it wasn't when it was spread out. He raced from 2 to 11.
Yep.
So when you spread it out over that period, I think his biggest year might have been 18 starts. So, he and Gavin would drive him sometimes, and he'd come back and say, don't race him for 3 weeks. I had to hurt him a little bit tonight. I had to ask him to do a bit more work than I normally do. So, Gavin always stipulated in the background, look after this one, because I remember the first start we gave him in better class trotters in Melbourne. He'd worked his way down through things, and we gave him the better class trotters. Gav said, we'll find out whether he's going to measure up as good as what I think. I said, yeah, okay. So he won, and Gav came back, and he had that little smile on the face, and he said, I think he might be better.
Didn't you think? And what was that, just like an MO class or TMO class race?
Yeah, it was a nice race. I remember Stewie Rothiger had a horse in it called Trinket that was going fairly good at the time. And he sort of treated her with a bit of contempt, and Gav came back, and he was fairly happy when he came back. Not because he'd won, but because he could see the future that was there.
Yep.
And it was good. But he always, and because he's by a pacing stallion, he probably never had a great gait until he got later in life. But he's such a big, gawky fellow, you knew him, Paul. He possibly needed a bit longer to give him time, but he had natural ability, so you raced him a little bit young, but not real bad. Like, we didn't give him a lot of starts, so he was good.
Probably a different time back then, because I mean, we're talking a little bit about these races on Friday night as well, coming up. But there wasn't the trotting races, let alone the 2-year-old and 3-year-old trotting races. They weren't in as high demand back when he was starting out.
Oh no, there was just what they used to call that, Galaxy or something, didn't they?
Yep, Galaxy Grand Slam. Yeah.
Yeah, they had that, and he wasn't eligible for Victorian sires because he was a New South Wales bred horse. So he didn't go in any sires, which possibly affected his end earnings or race at the finish, because he would have won sires races because he beat them in everything else. So he would have won sires races, but you can't have everything. You sort of, like G.A. Lang told me once, just get them that can win a race. Don't worry about what they're in, because if you can win a race, there's always a race.
Yep.
And that was...
So when he was racing, Scotch Notch is GA's pin-up horse. Were they around that same time, or was she just before him?
She was just before him. They rang me once to go to Geelong in a free-for-all that she was in, and he was 4, and I wouldn't take him, mainly because Gav said he's not ready for her if he's ever going to be, and we don't want him just learning that it hurts a bit to chase something like her. So I wouldn't race him. Well, they never clashed, and I wouldn't start him in that because, people can say, he's going to get beaten. We possibly knew that. We didn't want to hurt him.
Did Gavin drive Scotch Notch from time to time then, or was it always GA?
Gavin drove her not a lot. He was funny. I went to GA's place one day, and Scotchy was there, and he was going out to work, and it was starting to rain, and she got to the end of the shelter and she stopped. And GA said, well, we're still going to have to do it, Dale, because even though you're going to get wet, so am I. So they went on, but GA's relationship with her was very good. It was his pin-up girl, and was entitled to be.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the things. Like I'm 48, and she was prior to me. That's for sure. Like, you sort of forget, and even True Roman, he was, I think, 8-year-old when I started working for you, and the likes. And this is one of the things that I try to do is actually remember these horses and remind people about actually how good these horses really were. Yeah,
well, when you was there, Paul, we probably had Real Force at the same time, didn't we?
We did, yeah. And I was fortunate enough to get to drive him because he was a little bit saner.
He was a lovely horse to drive. He was just a lovely horse, wasn't he, Force?
Yeah.
But, and they took a lot of time, as you would know. Like, I used to walk him out the road in the afternoon because True Roman had brains when he's out on the road. He just didn't have brains when he was on the track. And I'd walk him, drive one, lead the other one, and walk him for so long, and then come back and swim him. And, a lot of time put into him, but... you're fairly privileged to have 2 horses with their ability who both won in the Dominions in your place. Not that Force won it with us, he'd gone back to New Zealand, but I think we had Force for something like 10 months and won 12 races, including the South Australian Derby. Should have won the Victorian Derby, but he'd been racing the other handed in New Zealand. He detoured the wrong way in the first turn, and then Exemplify beating a head or something like that. But lovely horse, Force, beautiful.
They actually ran second and fourth in the Australian Trotters Championship, which was just on the overnight, the year I was working for you. Gavin drove Force and Glenn Conroy drove True Roman. It was one of the few times I think Gavin didn't drive him in a major race.
Yeah, Gavin didn't because we didn't want to go to New Zealand that year because Force was only 4 and he was American bred, so he was just 4. He was 4 years and a week or something when he won the Inter-Dominion. And we didn't want to go, but he had some funny owners. Sorry if the owners are still... No, they're not listening. And anyway, he was just a horse that we thought was the next big thing. And Gavin said, well, I better drive Force. And it was Gavin's decision, and we were quite happy to go along with it. And perhaps the old horse was getting a bit old too at that stage. But there's only 3 people ever won on True Roman. That was GA, Gavin and myself. The other ones that got beaten. You're an
astute company.
Oh, am I ever?
You've got to be able to hang your hat on something. That's a pretty big call.
Andrew Peace got beaten on him. I think D Dove, Glenn Conroy. I think there was somebody else. Henry might have driven him once. But anyway, Andrew was the funniest because he was leaning out the cart swinging down the back to see if he was trotting or pacing.
Oh, because he couldn't work it out.
He couldn't work it out. He hadn't driven Trotters very much, Andrew. And, he just... It was a good joke for Gavin anyway. He enjoyed it, the fact that Andrew sort of didn't handle it real good.
One of the things I think a lot of the people won't remember about him was actually how hard he used to race. And I know there was one night at South Australia, you went over there with him and you said that Gavin sat down on the lump of wood after driving him. He did jog down another lap. He did it and he didn't move for 2 races. He was that exhausted about how hard. So it's actually how hard this horse could pull. Yeah,
he could really he'd be no different to trying to arrange those posts, but he could really pull. And I remember one night he'd give Gavin a fairly rough time, and Gav came back and he said, don't want him to get any worse. And I said, we can't get much worse. That's as bad as he was. But what a lot of people didn't know or don't know is the week of the Inter-Dominion, Gavin done his shoulder at home. So he rang up and he said, you better put somebody else on him. I don't know whether I'll hold him with my shoulder. I said, no, I don't want to put anybody else on him. And he said, well, I'm going to have to dash out and get the front where he'll settle better. And he'd drawn the outside the front line, and they had more across than 7. Then I don't know how many. It was 10. 10.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said, we're going to have to brush out. And I remember Clinton Welsh telling me he was driving, that nice mare he used to drive, and she'd drawn inside him. He thought, Gav's back half a cart. It's the usual Gav job. He's going to just drop off. And he said in about 10 metres before we hit the dispatch, he said he turned to Tucumcari. Yeah, I can remember something. And he turned him loose, and he cleared him fairly easy from out there. And when he won and he was coming back, the clerk of the course was saying to Gav, "Go on, Gav, lift your cap up and wave," because he knew that Gav couldn't with his shoulder. So, yeah, but I was pleased the way it turned out, because, nobody deserved to drive him and win a big race, or a bigger race than what Gav did. And, so he was just part of him.
Gavin was only young then too, wasn't he? Because that was actually his first Inter-Dominion win. He won 4 as a trotting driver, and he wasn't overly old then.
No, the one of Lil's, it won after, didn't it?
Yep.
The one in Sydney.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I know we won the South Australian Derby with a pacer. That was in '83, and Gav was fairly young then, because I remember GA saying to me, he said, not many people would stick to the lad when you're getting into bigger races. I said, well, he's got him here, and when True Roman started to look like he was a good horse, GA said to me then, he said, I don't know whether you'll be sticking to the lad or not. I said, well, we'll be as far as I'm concerned, because drivers are a little bit like good young horses. You see one come along every few years that you think he's a bit more special. And I think one of the most special young drivers we've had come on since Gav was Greg Sugars.
Yep.
And I think now I'm a fairly big fan of Jason Lees. And it's no insult to the other ones, But that's no insult to horses that run behind a champion either.
No. One of Gav's greatest attributes I found later in life was when we had Son of a Trump. He would stick fat with them. He always stuck really fat with you, didn't he? Like with your stable, he'd quite often back in the day he'd go to Oyen and he didn't even want to be there. I remember one day going there with a truckload and he wasn't that happy about being there. But he'd always stick fat with you, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well, Gav was probably a bit earlier in his career then. He mightn't have stuck as close at the finish, but he wasn't entitled to either, because at the finish, after I'd been to South Australia and came back here, he was only doing a couple of horses, and they weren't good enough to ask Gavin to come to so-and-so and drive them. And people used to say, oh, you've been good to him, he should come. But they didn't look at it from the other point of view. Like, Gav had a full life.
Yep. Without
having to display loyalty to everybody that had been loyal to him. He would never have been home.
No.
And that's so. But if I had a good horse, he would have come. Like we had a horse there called Living Bonus.
Yep.
And he drove him. Dasher drove him a lot, but he drove him a lot too. And a lot of times he won the Central Victorian Championship on him, and he sort of went out of his way to go and drive him in the heats and give us a bit of feedback and things like that. So it was never any different at the finish, except I could respect that he didn't need to be going up the bush to drive something that was also ran a lot of times.
Yourself, Gavin, True Roman, you have a unique record that I don't think will be broken. I think it's 30 plus races at Moonee Valley?
He won 34 at the Valley. He won 73 all told.
And 50 plus on metro tracks?
Yeah, probably did.
Yeah, with Globe Derby and
Gavin won 66 on him. I think GA won 4 and I won 3. Gee, we were champion drivers on him. No wonder the horse could win.
Your association then, especially with Moonee Valley and Gavin and the likes, you've come back here to South Australia. Yourself and Jenny are training a horse called Strident that was just beautifully educated. You've got to say that, like all the trial educations and everything else like that. But there's this great picture of Gavin walking out, and it's Jenny's colours, but I mean, here you are, you've won more races than any horse, doesn't matter if it's a thoroughbred or not, at this track, and then you've also won the last harness racing race to be held at Moonee Valley, and that may change. There's a lot of people hope it does, but as we stand at the minute, it's not going to change, and that must be a pretty fitting memory that you've got.
Even if it does change, Paul, there won't be another one win 34.
No.
Don't care whether they're gallopers or pony trots. They won't win 34. It's a different system now. Don't get me started on the system. I don't like it. And it's just one of those. Yeah, we had a special thing. Old Strident was a good horse. First start we gave him, we had some learner fella drive him at Charlton, and he won by about 20 metres. You did a good job that day, Paul, but we won't tell everybody it was you.
I remember telling Mickey Bellman, I just got to get out of here, and I just shoved him. I was gone. I thought I was going to get shot if not. It's not about me either, so it doesn't matter. The Redwood and the Redwood Carnival is something that has grown. You won the inaugural Redwood, I believe. Is that right, with Young Trooper?
Yeah, Young Trooper. Yeah,
yep.
Lovely horse.
And Gavin drove that horse as well?
Yep.
That wasn't on an all Trotters day, was it?
No. To
see how the Redwood Carnival has grown to now being 2 days. This year, unfortunately, was a little bit different, but 2 all trotting days and horses missing out on runs. I mean, from the start, when you rocked up to win that day with Young Trooper, are you aware of what everyone in the trotting fraternity was actually doing and how big it was potentially going to grow?
Yeah, at the time I was a member of the Square Gators Association, the committee, and Dick Lee, Ralph Ford, and Bobby Conroy and them, they were very progressive thinking about how big it was going to become. I've got to hand them that. They sort of thought it was going to be very big. And we had a chief steward at the time called Gerard Lawler. And I remember when they said they're going to run an all trotting day, he said, over my dead body, will they run an all trotting day, because he didn't really like the Trotters much. And when he came to South Australia, I was there, so I called him Lazarus, and he said, why? I said, well, you're back from the dead, because you said it. And I said, now they're running 3 or 4. And didn't have a real sense of humour. Might have been because he's a butcher or something. But anyway, he didn't appreciate it too much at the time. But then he laughed about it later. He said, yeah, fair enough, he said. But he would look now and he'd just shake his head like a lot of people. You know, it's like the people that say, I'll never have a trotter in my stable. But a lot of them have now.
And that's where I was going. I think Breeders' Crown, normally there is a Great Southern Star night where they've got the All Trotters night. Bendigo this Friday night, they've got an All Trotters night. It's phenomenal how they've gone, and I think it fits in really well myself. Redwood is a standing start. I hope it stays to be a standing start forever and a day, because that's the style of race it should be. What they've got going at Bendigo with the Graeme Lang and then the Gavin Lang as well is designed around speed, which is more new age, but to be able to keep that trotting. Do you sit back and you go, wow, and a horse like True Roman, as I said, he's got naming rights as one of the races there, but he's also potentially one of the trotters that change the way people think about it. Like you said, an Andrew Peace drives him one day and he's not sure if he's trotting or pacing. They actually have a look then at trotters. Are you aware of the gravity of what a horse like he may have done?
Yeah, I think a lot of them. Vinnie Knight was a great fan of True Romans. He used to stand and watch the races with me a lot. And one day, a day meeting at Moonee Valley, True Roman won the free-for-all, which was the Pacers free-for-all, but True Roman won it. And Vinnie drove a horse for Philip Morgan.
Yep.
Just forget the horse's name at the moment. But when Jake went past him on the corner, Vinnie yelled out, "Go, Jake, you beauty!" And Vinnie loved him. He used to come up and watch him with me and things like that, and he used to say, "Oh, he must have a heart that's flat-fitting inside him."
Yeah. You didn't go close to putting him on?
No, I don't know why, but yeah, probably.
That'd have been a nice combination, wouldn't they?
Vinnie was a bit too boisterous for True Roman. He didn't need any excuse to get on the bit.
Vinnie would have took the helmet off halfway down the back straight and started saluting on him. It would have been a good combination.
Yeah, it would have been.
But I mean, without horses like those, and you know, one of the things I try to do on Campbell's comments is actually just make sure we can remember a lot of the history and a lot of the tales. That, you know, a meeting with as much significance as what it's got, you know, to honour two legends of our sport. There's trailblazer horses as well, like Scotch Notch, Wagon Apollo, something about Murray. All these other horses have got a name on their night. Great to see Save Our Pennies. I mean, he wouldn't be held in the same regard as those, but he's got a race named after him as well. I think. It's amazing what Graeme and Gavin Lang done, and I was just wondering from your point of view how you feel about all that.
Yeah, I found, well, both of them spoke fairly cryptic. They wouldn't say very much, but they'd tell you a lot if you listened.
Yeah.
GA especially. But it was funny, when I was at Gavin's, like, they would be having the conversation and GA would go home and he'd come back 2 days later and they'd just go on with the conversation, like they'd just walk. It was, we used to just shake our heads in amazement with them, but that's the sort of people they were. But GA was very good to me with advice. He was good, but all trotting people were. Dick Lee, Ralph Ford, because the first trotter we had was True Roman, and haven't got one quite as good since. But
you're spoilt, that's why.
it was good because, you know, I was learned when I had a fair few trotters after, and they would lend you advice just so easily. It was just good. It was comradeship or something in trotting then. It was more friends, or I'm not quite certain how it was, because, like, I've been going around to them for a long time and I've seen lots of eras come and go, and that was one of the better eras, I suppose. But like a chap said to me the other day, you don't have to worry about that, because the young ones now, they think this is the era, so they're going to be positive anyway.
I was going to say, you know, Heath Redwood, Ralph Ford, was Heath Redwood, wasn't it? Huey Redwood. Sorry, Heath, he's still alive. Huey, Ralph Ford, a lot of these guys, even Dick Lee, who is still with us, they had a dream and the likes, and they just wanted to dream one day at Maryborough to have an All Trotters Day. Now they've got so many, but being on those committees at the time and being part of the growth of the trotters. There's a lot of people must be sitting back and going, this is super, including the guys upstairs that are just going to be sitting down on Friday night and watching it.
Fantastic. And like, we must give Mr. Driscoll, Yabby Farms man, heaps of credit, because he's leasing horses out. You can send one over here if you've got a spare. And, that sort of person is encouraging people to have horses that are bred in the purple. And, he is great for trotting. And it's instilled into those people that their next horse will probably be a trotter.
Yep.
So, I sort of think, it's easy to sit back from the sidelines and criticise some of our bigger people that come in the caper. But then if you look at the good they do for it, they definitely don't make money most times.
Duncan McPherson was a childhood friend with the Langs. He grew up with them.
So was his dad.
Yeah, and they had a great association. They're sponsoring majority of the night. They sponsor most of the trotting night. Pat Driscoll, the way the trotters now are looked at is totally different. They are lifting the bar. I know Duncan bought horses in America the other day. Whether they race here or stay there, it's getting smaller and smaller by the minute, which again is another thing. I'd imagine that these guys that decided that the trotters are the way of the future, not the Jerry Laylaws and the like, they must be smiling now saying, geez, we've done an okay enough job.
Done a great job. Plus, I think another thing that helped a lot is the people that were getting, say, enthusiastic about trotting, like Chris Lang, that went to Europe and seen the stage that trotting is held in Europe. Like, other sports, I think there's one bigger sport in Sweden than trotting, and that's something to do with snow skiing, and we're not going to upset them in Australia with our climate. But they had some thing, but their horses over there, their trotting horses, they that big day they have,
Elite Lot Day,
yeah, people get there 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and get a position and don't leave it.
Yeah.
Betting's not as big to them, but the love of the animal is, and that's one thing we lost a bit in Australia, is the love of the animal overtaken by the love of the bet. But the dyed-in-the-wool square-gating bloke is still the animal lover.
Yep.
And that's the biggest difference I can see in it. They still love their horse, and like you spoke before about Jenny, like she got tapes in there that she's been reminiscing over horses that we've raced here and things like that, and she had nothing to do with trotters before she met me. But I had a couple of trotters in work in South Australia, and those probably old stages, and she could drive them, in work, and she sort of fell in love with the trotter and found out that some of them could beat me when I was driving the pace and things like that, which made a big difference. And that sort of thinking has become more and more, that people that didn't like a trotter, if they get the opportunity to drive one and it's in full flight, if they don't like a trotter, then they've got a little problem, not the horse, it's them.
I know it was Christmas to me the day I got to drive Real Force following True Roman one day. I'd never, and I sort of hope everyone out there gets to drive a nice one. You said about Yabby Dam Farms and Pat Driscoll and that before. One of the great stories I tell is Anton. I was waiting to do an interview with him at Bendigo there one night, and he was late, and he apologised to me because there's this beautiful story written on True Roman on the wall just outside of the museum there. Rod Case actually wrote the story, and they've photocopied it and put it up on the wall, and he was reading it. But the thing that took me back wasn't that. He said, I'll read it every second time I walk past it. And I think that's what you say about the love. Like he just enjoys reading that. And it's a horse that he never had any association with, didn't have an association with.
Would have been gone before Anton came here.
Yeah, it's just that there's this trotter. And it's a unique thing, isn't it, when people actually fall in love with a certain style of horse.
Yeah, and like, you get a horse that's got all the courage and ability and things like that, and it didn't matter to Jake whether it was a stand or a mobile. He could fly out of both of them and things like that, and he was just a unique racehorse. And I will still say what I said before, he was so good because of Gavin.
Yep.
I don't care. And the fact that the owners, like Wendy and Roger, and we owned a share, but Wendy and Roger, like, we had lunch with them yesterday, so it's been a fairly long association. And nobody ever told me that the horse should be going there or the horse should be doing that. It was always left up to me. They probably knew I was pig-headed and I still would have done it my way. But they didn't try and interfere in any way. And that way, if the horse just wasn't right, I know we used to enter in for races where the handicaps were hard in those days. And I'd ring Gav, I'd say, what do you reckon, mate? He'd say, well, nothing off the front can win. The ones off 12 yards, none of them. So we're actually going to give our first danger 36 yards, and we can beat them giving them 36. And that's how he'd sum up a field, like that can't win and that can't win, but it is our first danger, so we can give it that start. So yeah, we'll start him there, sort of thing, and things like that. But we usually used country races. It might sound big-headed, but we used country races a lot, conditioning for a big race that was coming up in 4 weeks' time, because big races were what we concentrated on with him, because you don't get a chance to do it very often.
I think it's fitting, as I said, Bendigo Friday night. The first race on the Gazette won't be race 1, that's for sure, because it's a fast class race. But on a night to honour both Graeme Lang and Gavin Lang, I think it's well done. Thanks for joining me, mate. I could talk to you forever and a day, you know that, and I'm sure a lot of other people know that, but thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.